Claire Montgomery stood in her living room on a Saturday afternoon in early December, holding a cardboard box she'd just bought at an estate sale for $3. She was 64, recently retired from teaching, and had developed a weekend habit of browsing estate sales, partly for the treasure hunt, partly to fill the empty hours that retirement had brought. The box was labeled Old Postcards and Ephemera in faded marker. Claire loved vintage postcards, used them in art projects, framed the interesting ones. $3 seemed like a bargain for what looked like hundreds of cards. She dumped the contents onto her coffee table and began sorting through them. Postcards from the 1950s showing tourist attractions. Vintage Christmas cards. Old valentines. Business cards from long-defunct stores. Most of it was lovely junk. Pretty to look at, mildly interesting, nothing special. Then, near the bottom of the pile, Claire found an envelope that made her freeze. It was addressed to her maiden name, Claire Brennan. The address was her childhood home in Philadelphia, the house where she'd lived until she was 18. The return address was from someone named Robert Sullivan in Boston. But it was the postmark that made Claire's hands shake. December 20th, 2004. 20 years ago. This was a Christmas card from 2004, addressed to her, that had never been delivered. And somehow, 2 decades later, it had ended up in a random estate sale box that Claire had bought for $3. With trembling fingers, Claire opened the envelope. Inside was a Christmas card, a simple design with a snow-covered church. And inside the card, a handwritten letter in neat, careful script. Dear Claire, I know it's been 20 years since we've spoken. I know you probably don't want to hear from me. I know I have no right to reach out after what I did, but it's Christmas, and I'm dying, and I need to tell you something before it's too late. I'm sorry. I'm so deeply, profoundly sorry for what happened in 1984. For the choice I made. For how I hurt you. For the cowardice that kept me from reaching out all these years. You deserve better than what I gave you. You deserved honesty, courage, commitment. Instead, I gave you betrayal and abandonment. I've carried the guilt of that for 20 years, and I'll carry it to my grave. But I also need you to know, leaving you was the worst mistake of my life. Not a day has passed that I haven't thought about you, about us, about what we could have been. You were the love of my life, Claire. You still are. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. I'm not asking for anything, really. I just needed you to know that you mattered, that what we had was real, that I've regretted my choice every single day since I made it. I hope you found happiness. I hope you found someone who loved you the way you deserve to be loved. I hope you've had a beautiful life. I'm sorry I wasn't brave enough to be part of it. With love and regret. Robert. Claire read the letter 3 times, her mind spinning. Robert Sullivan. She hadn't thought about that name in years, hadn't let herself think about it. 20 years ago, 2004. No, 40 years ago, 1984. That's when it had happened, when Robert had broken her heart so thoroughly that she'd thought she might never recover. They'd met in college in 1980. Claire was studying education at Temple University. Robert was pre-law. They'd met at a party, started dating, fell completely in love. For 4 years, they were inseparable. Everyone assumed they'd get married. Claire certainly assumed it. Then, in the spring of 1984, right before graduation, Robert had broken up with her, out of nowhere. No real explanation, just that he, quote, couldn't do this anymore, that he needed to figure out his life, that it wasn't fair to her. 2 weeks later, Claire found out through mutual friends that Robert had gotten back together with his high school girlfriend Amanda. The girl he'd dated before college, the one he'd told Claire, was completely in the past. Apparently, Amanda had shown up at graduation, and Robert had chosen her. Just like that. 4 years with Claire, erased, replaced. It had devastated Claire. She'd spent that summer in a fog of grief and humiliation. All her plans, the future she'd imagined with Robert, gone. She'd felt like a fool for believing in their relationship, for trusting him, for giving him her heart. Eventually, she'd moved on, thrown herself into her teaching career, dated other people, though nothing serious, for many years. Eventually married Tom Montgomery when she was 32, a good man, a stable marriage, 28 years together before he died of cancer 4 years ago. And Robert? She'd heard through the grapevine that he'd married Amanda in 1985, had children, became a successful lawyer in Boston, lived what everyone assumed was a perfect life. Claire had forced herself to stop caring, to stop wondering, to stop feeling anything about Robert Sullivan. And she'd succeeded, mostly. Until now. Now, sitting in her living room 20 years after this letter was written, 40 years after Robert had broken her heart, Claire was shaking. He'd been dying in 2004. He'd written to apologize, to confess his regret. But the letter had never arrived, had been lost in the mail, somehow ended up in someone's collection of old postcards, and sat in a box for 2 decades, until Claire bought it at an estate sale. Was Robert still alive? Almost certainly not. If he'd been dying 20 years ago, he would have been 64 in 2004, her age now. Pancreatic cancer, maybe. Brain tumor. Something that gave him time to write letters but not much time left. So this was a message from a dead man. An apology that arrived 20 years too late. Claire didn't know what to feel. Anger at Robert for the way he'd hurt her? Sadness at the waste of it all? Curiosity about whether he'd really meant what he wrote? She picked up her phone and did something she hadn't done in 40 years. She searched for Robert Sullivan online. It didn't take long to find his obituary. Robert Michael Sullivan died January 15, 2005, at age 65, after a brief battle with pancreatic cancer. Survived by his wife Amanda, his 3 children and 5 grandchildren. Successful career as a civil rights attorney in Boston. Active in his church and community. So he died just a few weeks after writing this letter. And the letter had never reached Claire. Had been lost, misdelivered, somehow ended up in an estate sale box of random postcards. Claire stared at the obituary photo. Robert at 65, still handsome, graying hair, kind eyes. The face of the boy she'd loved, aged 40 years. He'd called her the love of his life. Said leaving her was his worst mistake. Said he'd regretted it every day. But he'd stayed with Amanda, married her, raised children with her, spent 40 years with her. So how much could he really have regretted it? Claire felt a familiar anger rising. Even from the grave, Robert was still confusing her, still making her question everything. She almost threw the letter away, almost decided that some messages were better left unread, that the past should stay buried. But something stopped her. A question, maybe. Or a need for closure she didn't know she still wanted. She looked at the obituary again. Survived by his wife Amanda Sullivan of Boston. Amanda was still alive. Would be in her mid-80s now. Did Amanda know Robert had written this letter? Did she know he'd carried regret about Claire for 40 years? Claire made a decision that felt both crazy and necessary. She would find Amanda Sullivan, she would tell her about the letter, she would get answers. Maybe it was closure, maybe it was revenge, maybe it was just the need to understand what had really happened 40 years ago. But whatever it was, Claire felt more purposeful than she had in months. The empty retirement days suddenly had direction. It took 3 days of internet searching to find Amanda Sullivan. She was 86, living in an assisted living facility in Boston. Claire found a phone number and, before she could talk herself out of it, called. Hello? An elderly woman's voice, still strong. Is this Amanda Sullivan? Yes. Who's calling? Claire took a breath. My name is Claire Montgomery. My maiden name was Brennan. I'm calling about your late husband, Robert. A long pause. Then, Claire Brennan, Robert's girlfriend from college. Yes, I'm sorry to call out of the blue. This is going to sound strange, but I recently found something, and I need to talk to you about it. What did you find? A letter, from Robert. Written in December 2004, right before he died. It was addressed to me, but it never arrived. I just found it at an estate sale. I know this must sound bizarre. What did the letter say? Amanda's voice was suddenly sharp. Claire hesitated. Maybe this is something we should discuss in person. I know it's a lot to ask, but I live in Philadelphia. I could drive to Boston. Would you be willing to meet with me? Another long pause. Then, surprisingly, yes, come on Saturday. I'll meet you in the common room at 2 o'clock, Brookside Assisted Living in Newton. Thank you. I'll be there. Saturday morning, Claire drove to Boston, the letter in her purse. 4 hours to think about what she was doing, to question her sanity, to wonder if this was a terrible idea. But she kept driving. Brookside Assisted Living was a nice facility. Claire checked in at the front desk and was directed to the common room, where an elderly woman sat in a wheelchair by the window. Amanda Sullivan had aged into a small, bird-like woman with white hair and sharp blue eyes. She looked at Claire with an expression Claire couldn't quite read. "You look like your pictures," Amanda said. "From the albums." Claire sat down across from her. "Robert kept pictures of me?" "A few, from college. He thought I didn't know about them, but I did." Amanda's voice was matter-of-fact. "Let me see the letter." Claire handed it to her. Amanda read it slowly, her face unchanging. When she finished, she folded it carefully and handed it back. "So you never received this?" Amanda asked. "Not until last week. It was in an estate sale box. I have no idea how it ended up there instead of being delivered to me." Amanda nodded slowly. "I know how.